In the Pokemon TCG, supporter cards often have great effects since you can only play one per turn. Oftentimes, supporter cards that draw or search specific cards are key to fully set up your strategy in the early game. Today, we're going to be looking at some of the best supporter cards that help with consistent setup. And at number 10, we have Green's Exploration. This card lets you search your deck for any 2 trainer cards and put them into your hand, but it can only be played when you have no Pokemon with abilities in play. Throughout the history of the game, many of the strongest decks available in their respective standard formats have relied on strong, impactful Pokemon abilities to further their strategy. Green's Exploration forced players that want to use it to build their entire deck around it by cutting off access to any ability effects. In turn, these ability-lacking strategies gained a level of search power few other cards could match. The category trainer card means that Green's Exploration could search any 2 combination of item, stadium, Pokemon tool, or supporter cards. With these combinations, Green's Exploration could add almost any card a player needed, even those it didn't search directly. If you needed multiple Pokemon, you could search Quick Ball, Cherish Ball, or Evolution Incense. If you needed extra energy in hand, you could search for Energy Spinner or Giant Hearth. If you're already set up and didn't need more Pokemon or energy, the utility of adding any 2 trainer cards from deck to your hand offered a plethora of options. Consistent access to Power Plant and Reset Stamp gave Green players easy access to Disruption, and searching 2 copies of Custom Catcher meant they could pick off any of your opponent's bench Pokemon. If you were ever in a position of needing only a single trainer card for a turn instead of 2, Green's Exploration could search another copy of itself or other utility supporters as a second trainer card to guarantee follow-up on your next turn. The only real issue with this card was its built-in downside that restricted what strategies could use it. Competitively, this meant being paired alongside powerful Tag Team GX or VMAX Pokemon, which often lacked abilities. The high HP of cards like Gardevoir and Sylveon GX and Centiskorch VMAX meant they were difficult to KO, and could take full advantage of the excellent utility provided by Green's Exploration throughout a game. This supporter card was exceptionally strong, but limited in what decks could really abuse its power. And at number 9, we have a trio of cards: Celio's Network, Professor Elm's Method, and Bebe's Research. These 3 are nearly identical in the purpose they serve, so it only makes sense to talk about them at the same time. Celio's Network lets you add any Pokemon except Pokemon EX from your deck to your hand. Professor Elm's Method lets you add any evolution Pokemon, and Bebe's Search lets you add any kind of Pokemon, but makes you shuffle 1 card from your hand into your deck to do so. To players only familiar with the more modern formats of the Pokemon TCG, these cards may seem completely unplayable. In fact, many of them have gotten near or strict upgrades in the form of item cards with their effects over the years. However, the Pokemon TCG's older formats played at a much slower pace in the modern game, and had overall weaker supporter cards. While using your once per turn supporter card to search only a single Pokemon would be terrible in today's game, where Pokemon item search is highly prevalent, these cards were frequently a deck's best way to search evolution Pokemon that couldn't be gone off of effects such as Dunsparce's Strike and Run. In the 2005 standard format, strategies running multiple distinct evolution lines, like Ludicolo Magcargo or the Pidgeot engine, would use Celio's Network to search Pokemon needed in a specific turn before pivoting to more generic card draw once they had their evolution line set up. When Professor Elm's Method was released, its ability to search Pokemon EX facilitated Toolbox EX strategies like evolutions. During the Diamond and Pearl era of the Pokemon TCG, Bebe's Search saw consistent usage as the best way to get any type of Pokemon card out of your deck, something very important in a very evolution-reliant era of the game. In terms of modern-day power level, these 3 cards are the worst on the list, but very few cards have been as important in the context of their standard formats as these cards were. And at number 8, we have Lillie, a card whose effect gets better if you use it during your first turn. This supporter card lets you draw cards until you have 6 in your hand. However, if you play it on your first turn, you get to draw up to 8 cards instead. Before talking about the card more, it's important to note that the first turn supporter rules were different when Lillie first released. During the Sun and Moon block, the player going first could use a supporter card, unlike today, where they can't. Under the current TCG rules, the player going first wouldn't be able to draw up to 8 cards since they couldn't play Lillie on their first turn. This rule difference massively impacted Lillie's playability, and assured that both players could get the improved effect in a single game. When Lillie first released, it didn't see much play due to competing with more powerful draw supporters from the X and Y block. Some decks did still play it at a single copy, searchable by Tapu Lulu GX for the first turn due to how strong drawing up to 8 cards was. When this supporter became a format staple was when the X and Y block rotated out of standard. With Professor Sycamore around, Lillie became an important part of every deck's setup turn. The card provided a kind of value more similar to Green's Exploration than Pokemon Collector. In a format with Nest Ball and Ultra Ball, you didn't always need to use your supporter to get basic Pokemon. Instead, Lillie drew you extra cards on your opponent's turn after you've already used your items and bench any Pokemon from hand. The value this card provided was from the follow-up it drew you into on your setup turns. If your hand size was low from playing cards on your first turn before drawing updated cards, you were likely to find necessary evolution Pokemon or ways to access them on your second turn. Lillie also wasn't a terrible card if you didn't play it on your first turn. Many competitively successful decks opted to use their full 4 copies because players could often find themselves at low hand sizes where the supporter would draw 4 or 5 cards. This card was also excellent in the event that it got you a reset stamp, a powerful hand disruption card that could put you down to 1 or 2 cards in hand during the late game. Although its power somewhat fluctuated during its time in Standard, Lillie was always a card to consider in your deck for as long as it remained legal to play. And at number 7, we have Roseanne's Research, another Diamond and Pearl era setup staple. This card lets you search your deck for any combination of 2 basic Pokemon or basic energy cards and put them into your hand. This supporter was a near 4-of staple in every deck during its time in the Standard format. First and foremost, getting basic Pokemon required for evolution lines is good. Secondly, Roseanne's Research was never truly a dead card in your hand. If you drew it in the late game after having already set up your Pokemon, you can add 2 basic energy cards to your hand and guarantee your energy attachments for the next few turns. And of course, you can get a combination of the 2 if you didn't need 2 cards of one type. Many strong supplementary draw engines or utility Pokemon existed during this format, and this supporter made sure you'd get them set up. Searching out ball toys on the first turn to evolve into Claydol later gave players a consistent card draw throughout the rest of the game. In SP Toolbox decks, you could search utility Pokemon like Crobat G, Bronzong G, or basic energy to facilitate your attackers. Plenty of basic Pokemon which provided utility on their own also existed during this format. If you needed card draw, you could search for Uxie. Was it important Pokemon in your prize card? Go add Azlev. Roseanne's Research was as ubiquitous during its standard format as item card Pokemon search is today. Generally speaking, this supporter made sure players that drew it early would have a reasonable setup while providing solid mid to late game utility and never truly be a dead card in hand. And at number 6, we have Pokemon Collector. This card has the effect of adding any 3 basic Pokemon from your deck to your hand. This card is very similar to Roseanne's Research in the sense that drawing it in the early game allows you to easily establish basic Pokemon for your various evolution lines or for their own generic utility. The main difference between these 2 is Pokemon Collector can't search energy and instead it gets an extra basic Pokemon. The extra Pokemon makes an enormous difference in card power. It's hard to describe how impactful that extra basic Pokemon could be without giving some examples. So take a few from the 2011 World Championship format and the later HGSS through Noble Victory standard format. Reshifusion was a popular and powerful deck during the 2011 World Championship due to the high damage output of Reshiram's Blue Flare attack combined with the energy acceleration of Typhlosion's Afterburner Pokepower. With 2 Typhlosion and 1 Reshiram, and an energy attachment from hand, you could use Blue Flare every single turn. Pokemon Collector can search 2 Cyndaquil to evolve into Typhlosion, and 1 Reshiram for this setup on its own. There also existed many decks which played upwards of 3 or more evolution lines during this format. Stage 1 was a deck built around 3 different Stage 1 Pokemon. Thanks to adding any 3 basics, Pokemon Collector could theoretically set up 1 of each of the required basics. In the Noble Victory set, 2 strategies were released that arguably made the best use of Pokemon Collector at the time: Durant and Eels. Durant's Devour attack forced your opponent to discard cards from the top of their deck equal to the number of Durant you had in play. Since the deck played no other basic Pokemon, you'd always start your active with a Durant. Then a Pokemon Collector in your first turn would get the remaining Durants out of your deck and maximize Devour's meals. Eels was the toolbox strategy using Electric's Dynamotor ability to set up a steady flow of strong Electric-type attackers. Since the basic Pokemon needed to evolve into Electric, Dynamo had such low HP, it was very prone to being knocked out early. This card was a staple for most of its standard format lifespan, and so deserves a spot on this list. And at number 5, we have Korrina and Irida. 2 cards with the same effect, but supporting different types. These supporters let you search your deck for an item card and any fighting or water-type Pokemon respectively. Korrina and Irida continue the trend of being strong setup tools while providing good utility in the mid to late game. Even with the type difference, these 2 cards play extremely similarly. On the first few turns, if you need more bench Pokemon, Korrina or Irida could search basic Pokemon of the respective types alongside an item card to get another Pokemon into play. During Korrina's time in Standard, this usually meant searching for Ultra Ball. In the current Standard format where Irida is still legal, you can add Battle VIP Pass or Buddy Poffin to search 3 Pokemon off of a single supporter card. You didn't have to add basic Pokemon of these cards either. Korrina often searched out Donphans and Robo Substitutes after all their basic Pokemon were set up. Irida frequently searches Palkia V-Star or Baxicalibur in Chen Pao EX decks. If you need to protect your bench Pokemon from damage, Irida can add Manaphy as an extra layer of defense. Some decks would even search for Lumineon V to add any supporter card out of their deck for the next turn. These two supporter cards also have a fairly unique synergy with Stage 2 Pokemon. If you already have a basic Pokemon needed for your evolution line, take Frigibax or Baxicalibur, you could search out both the Stage 2 and a copy rare candy to immediately evolve with. If all these two cards were just set up, they wouldn't be nearly as high on this list. They also offer powerful utility through searching any item out of your deck. If you were short on damage for a KO, Korrina could add damage modification in the form of Muscle Band back when Pokemon tools were still treated as items. If for whatever reason you needed a stadium card, perhaps a Silent Lab to disable the abilities of basic Pokemon, you can add Computer Search. Utility items like Prime Catcher and Canceling Cologne exist in the current standard format for Irida to search. Both of these supporter cards are great boons to any deck that uses Pokemon of their type. And at number 4, we have Holon Mentor. At the cost of discarding one card from your hand, this supporter lets you add any 3 basic Pokemon with 100 HP or less from your deck to your hand. That limit on the Pokemon's HP was very rarely relevant, as few basic Pokemon, even Pokemon EX, had over 100 HP during the standard format Holon Mentor was legal. We've already talked a lot about how good getting 3 basic Pokemon is in this video, and the same logic applies to this supporter. This card was arguably one of the strongest components of the Holon engine, a series of supporter cards and item cards called Holon Transceivers, which were widely popular and competitively successful. Holon Transceivers lets you search your deck or discard pile for any Holon supporter card and put it into your hand. This item card is what gave Holon Mentor the edge over the consistency supporters like Lynette's Net Search. Holon's Transceiver functionally meant you could play upwards of 8 copies of Holon Mentor in your deck between having a full playset of both cards. Maximizing your odds of drawing a setup supporter was extremely important during this era of the game, as they weren't easily searchable. Playing more than 4 Holon Mentor through having 4 Holon Transceivers gave any strategy reliant on having multiple basic Pokemon in play fantastic consistency. Being a Holon card meant these strategies would play the rest of the Holon engine. Usually this meant playing around 2 copies of Holon Adventure for generic card draw, and 1 Holon Scientist to catch up to opponents with massive hand sizes. Playing more copies of the Holon engine meant Holon Transceiver would always provide some utility, even if you didn't need Holon Mentor. There was also a series of cards that gave Holon Mentor some extra versatility over just searching basic Pokemon for evolutions later down the line. Holon's Cast Form was a basic Pokemon that could return 1 energy card attached to one of your Pokemon to attach itself as an energy card. When attached, Holon's Cast Form provided 2 energies of any type. This Pokemon allowed decks that would otherwise be stuck to using a single energy type to power out almost any attacker they wanted. Cast Form alongside the Holon engine was a key component of Blastoise EX decks, one of the most iconic strategies from the era. This strategy both benefited heavily from extra consistency of the Holon engine and used Cast Form in combination with Blastoise's Energy Rain Pokepower to enable game-winning threats with strange energy costs like Lugia EX. The Holon engine was the backbone of numerous strategies during its time in the standard format, thanks in part to Holon Mentor. And at number 3, we have Cyrus's Conspiracy. This card lets you add 1 supporter, basic energy, and Team Galactic's invention from your deck to your hand. A Team Galactic's invention was a special tag given to some trainer cards during the Diamond and Pearl era of the TCG in 2009. There were 5 of these inventions in total, with 4 of them being extremely powerful. The invention synergized with SP Pokemon, another special category, extremely well. There were a few different variations of SP decks, but they all included a few key cards: Crobat G, Energy Gain, Poketurn, and Power Spray. Crobat G's Flashbite Pokepower lets you put 1 damage counter onto any of your opponent's Pokemon when played from your hand. With Poketurn, reusing Flashbite to take KOs and spread damage was trivial, and any low HP Pokemon could be returned to your hand to deny your opponent prize cards. Energy Gain made it so that your SP Pokemon it was attached to had its attack cost reduced by 1 colorless energy. This allowed players to attack extremely aggressively for 1 energy with Luxray GL level X's Flash Impact after forcing one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot with its Bright Look Pokepower. Other utility attackers like Toxicroak G or Dialga G also loved making their attacks cost 1 energy. Once Double Color's energy was reprinted to the standard format of 2010, Garchomp C level X would use its Dragon Rush attack for a single attachment and threaten any of your opponent's bench Pokemon with massive damage. The last piece of the SP toolbox, Power Spray, is very unique in the Pokemon TCG. This card can only be used during your opponent's turn and lets you prevent the effects of one of your opponent's Pokepowers when they try to activate it. Not only could this deck be incredibly aggressive, It also had an excellent grind game thanks entirely to Cyrus's Conspiracy. This card was the main tool for both consistency and card advantage for SP decks. Adding any basic energy to your hand meant you'd always be able to use whichever attacker you needed at any given moment, despite playing Pokemon with a multitude of different energy cards. Searching any Team Galactic's invention, it made sure you'd always have your pick of aggression, utility, powerful disruption, or even Pokemon searchers thanks to SP Radar searching any Pokemon SP out of your deck. Lastly, searching any supporter card meant you could add Cyrus's Conspiracy and do it all again next turn. It wasn't too uncommon for SP decks to go Cyrus into Cyrus into Cyrus into Cyrus into Arven's collection after all their energies have been searched out of their deck. You didn't even need to play a full-on SP deck to take advantage of Cyrus's Conspiracy, as some non-SP decks wanted to play both Luxray Level X and Crobat G with Poketurn for the repeatable gusting and damage modification. This supporter is one of the best archetypal cards ever printed, seeing a World Championship win in both a dedicated SP strategy and a B-Drill, which incidentally made good use of it. And at number 2, we have Arven, the newest card on this list. This supporter had a simple effect, letting you add any item and Pokemon tool card from your deck to your hand. It's worth noting that since the start of the Scarlet and Violet block, Pokemon tools no longer counted as items. Although what it searches for is worse than a card like Green's Exploration and arguably Irida, Arven wins out over those two cards due to being entirely generic. The only real restriction to use an Arven is that you need to include a few Pokemon tool cards in your deck, something most players already do regardless of whether they play this supporter or not. In an age of item cards that search multiple basic Pokemon like Battle VIP Pass or Buddy Poffin, Arven not directly adding Pokemon to your hand is perfectly fine. In fact, if you already have a Buddy Poffin in your hand before playing your supporter, you have improved flexibility in your searches to get cards like Earthen Vessel for energy. The other aspect of Arven's strength is that searching any Pokemon tool card is deceptively flexible, with many different options existing for many situations. On the opening turn going second, Technical Machine Evolution lets you set up multiple Stage 1 Pokemon like Dracloak and Kirlia. If you need to retreat your active Pokemon, go add Rescue Board. Damage modification, search Defiance Band. There even exists a means to search any card in your deck off of Arven thanks to Forest Seal Stone. And of course, searching for any item card is as flexible as ever. Arven isn't the flashiest or the most unique card on this list, but its incredibly versatile utility and ease of utilization for a wide variety of strategies earns it the number 2 spot. Finally, rounding off this list at number 1, we have Professor's Research and its older counterparts. This supporter lets you discard your hand and draw 7 cards. The reason this card is at the top of this list is due to how it shaped the many different standard formats of different metagames. Compared to most other setup supporters, Professor's Research favors a fundamentally different strategy. Every other card on this list has been about setting up early plays to build advantage from over the course of a long game. Green's Exploration, Arven, Irida, Cyrus's Conspiracy all build up your hand and let you accrue resources over time. This playstyle generally favors strategies that rely on evolutions, since you need to get each of the different stages into your hand at some point, or those with lots of different components or combos like control decks. These slower strategies can't afford to discard key pieces from their hand. Professor's Research is heavily favored towards aggressive decks that require little to no setup or can somehow negate the loss of discard in your hand. This tends to manifest itself into decks with fast attacking, high damage basic Pokemon being heavily favored compared to evolutions once formats for Professor's Research is legal. The 2012 World Championship was completely dominated by these kinds of decks, with Darkrai EX and Mewtwo EX strategies stomping slower decks thanks to the consistency of Professor Juniper and Dark Patch speeding up energy attachments. There also have been strategies that take advantage of the intended downside by either wanting to discard lots of cards or by playing every single card in their hand before using research to maximize their advantage. The most iconic abuser of Professor Sycamore in this way was Night March. This deck revolved around putting as many cards with the Night March attack into the discard pile as possible. The attack dealt 20 damage for each Night Marcher in your discard pile, capping at 220 damage with 11 Night Marchers. In a format with few meta-relevant Pokemon that had HP greater than 220, this attack made Joltik a monstrous one-hit KO machine. Not only did this strategy actively want to discard cards, it was also more than capable of emptying its hand completely before using Professor Sycamore. This strategy also needed to draw double colorless energy, and the combination of Sycamore and Shaymin EX made sure you always would. Professor's Research is simply just the best setup supporter, if not one of the best supporter cards in general. Alright, and that's the video. If you think we missed any other better supporter cards, or if you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.